Sending that wedding invitation was a massive mistake. It was meant to be a cruel joke, a final way to remind a broke ex-wife of her place before the groom married an heiress. The Asher family expected her to show up in rags or stay home crying. But expectation collided violently with reality when the cathedral doors swung open. Orion didn't just return. She arrived in a limousine wearing a gown worth more than the venue and holding the hands of 3 secret triplets who looked exactly like the groom. In seconds, the laughter died and the panic began. This wasn't a wedding anymore. It was a hostile takeover. The envelope was cream-colored heavy and textured like linen. It sat on the polished mahogany desk of Orion Danvers's corner office in downtown Seattle, looking innocent enough. But Orion knew better. She knew that handwriting. It belonged to Margaret Asher, the woman who had once made it her life's mission to ensure Orion felt like dirt beneath her designer heels. Orion didn't reach for it immediately. She took a sip of her sparkling water, adjusting the cuffs of her silk blouse. The cityscape of Seattle sprawled out behind her, gray and rainy, a stark contrast to the sterile, climate-controlled perfection of her life now. "It came via courier this morning, Ms. Danvers," her assistant Sarah said, lingering by the door. "Marked personal. Priority." "Thank you, Sarah. That will be all." When the door clicked shut, Orion finally picked up the envelope. She slid a gold letter opener under the wax seal, a pretentious crest the Asher family had likely invented in the 80s to simulate old money. Inside, the calligraphy mocked her. "You are cordially invited to the wedding of Liam Asher and Jessica van der Hoven." Orion let out a dry, humorless laugh. Liam, the man who had promised to love her forever, right up until his mother threatened to cut off his trust fund. The man who had stood by silently while Margaret threw Orion's bags onto the rainy driveway 3 years ago, screaming that she was a gold-digging leech who would never amount to anything. There was a handwritten note tucked behind the RSVP card. It was in Margaret's jagged, aggressive script. "Orion, dear, we thought it would be Christian to invite you. Liam is finally marrying someone of his own caliber, but we didn't want you to feel forgotten in your little apartment. Do come. There will be an open bar. We know how much you like free things." The audacity was breathtaking. They didn't invite her out of kindness. They invited her to gloat. They wanted to see her broken. They wanted to see if she was still the terrified, weeping, 22-year-old waitress Liam had married in secret. They wanted to parade Jessica van der Hoven, an oil heiress with more plastic surgery than personality, in front of her face. They thought she was still broke. They thought she was still alone. Orion's hand instinctively went to the framed photograph on her desk. It wasn't facing the door. It was for her eyes only. In the photo, 3 toddlers with curly brown hair and bright green eyes were laughing on a beach. Noah Oliver and Henry, the Asher triplets. Liam didn't know. Margaret didn't know. When they had kicked her out that night, Orion had been 6 weeks pregnant. She had tried to tell Liam in the driveway, grabbing his arm as the rain soaked her cheap coat. "Liam, please, I have to tell you something." "Just go, Orion," he had snapped, refusing to look her in the eye, his mother's hand firmly on his shoulder. "It's over. Stop making a scene." So she went. She went, and she starved, and she worked 3 jobs, and she built a company from the ground up while raising 3 boys who looked so much like their father. It sometimes made her heart stop. She had founded Aura, a boutique tech consultancy that had recently been acquired for a sum that would make the Asher family's fortune look like pocket change. But she had kept her name out of the press. She used a holding company. To the Ashers, she was a ghost. and now the ghost was being summoned. Orion picked up her phone. She dialed a number that few people had. "Harrison," she said, when the deep voice answered. Harrison Blackwood, one of the most feared corporate litigators in New York, and incidentally the man who had helped Orion structure her company sale. He was also her date for the weekend, though he didn't know it yet. "Orion," Harrison's voice was warm. "To what do I owe the pleasure? Please tell me you're not suing anyone yet." "No lawsuit," Orion said, her eyes hardening as she looked at Margaret's cruel note. "But I need a favor. Do you have a tuxedo?" "I own 5. Why?" "I have a wedding to attend in the Hamptons, and I need you to help me destroy the groom." There was a pause, and then she could hear the smile in Harrison's voice. "I'll fuel the jet." The Asher estate in the Hamptons was exactly as Orion remembered it, ostentatious, loud, and trying too hard. White tents billowed on the great lawn, imported swans floated in the artificial lake, and security guards with earpieces roamed the perimeter like Secret Service agents. It was the social event of the season. Senators, tech moguls, and old money socialites were all there sipping champagne and whispering about the merger of the Asher and Vanderhoven families. In the bridal suite, Margaret Asher was fixing Jessica's veil. "You look perfection," Margaret purred, smoothing the lace. Finally, a woman worthy of the Asher name, not like that gutter trash Liam picked up last time. Jessica giggled, checking her reflection. Did she actually RSVP that waitress? She did. Margaret smirked. I honestly didn't think she'd have the nerve, but she's probably coming for the free food. I told security to keep an eye on the silverware. "Oh my God, Margaret, you are terrible." Jessica laughed. "I hope she wears something from a thrift store. It'll make for great photos." Downstairs, the ceremony was about to begin. The guests were taking their seats. Liam Asher stood at the altar, looking handsome but nervous. He adjusted his tie, sweating slightly in the midday sun. He kept glancing at the back rows, scanning the crowd. He told himself he wasn't looking for Orion. He told himself he didn't care. But guilt is a heavy ghost. The organ music began. The crowd hushed. But just before the bride was set to emerge the heavy oak doors at the back of the garden, usually reserved for the family, entrance swung open. It wasn't the bride. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. A sleek matte black limousine had pulled right up to the garden entrance, bypassing the valet. The driver, a mountain of a man, stepped out and opened the rear door. First came the shoe. A red-soled stiletto that cost more than most people's cars. Then the leg. And then Orion Danvers stepped out into the sunlight. She was wearing a blood-red gown, silk, cut on the bias, clinging to every curve of her body, like liquid fire. It was inappropriate for a wedding. It was aggressive. It was magnificent. Her hair, once frizzy and unmanageable, fell in sleek, expensive waves down her back. Diamonds, real ones, heavy and cold, glittered at her throat. But she wasn't alone. She turned back to the car and extended her hand. "Come on, boys," she said, her voice carrying through the sudden silence of the garden. "Chin up, just like we practiced." Out of the car hopped 3 little boys. They were dressed in miniature custom-tailored tuxedos that matched the groom's. They had the same dark, curly hair, the same sharp jawline beginning to form, the same piercing green eyes. Noah, Oliver, Henry. The crowd murmured. The whispers started like a brush fire. "Who is that? Are those—" "They look exactly like Liam." Orion didn't look at the guests. She didn't look at the altar. She walked down the center aisle, not waiting for an usher. She held the hands of Noah and Oliver, while Henry walked confidently ahead. She looked like a queen, returning to execute a rebellion. At the altar, Liam's face went white. The blood drained from his cheeks so fast he swayed on his feet. He looked at the three boys, and it was like looking into a mirror from 25 years ago. Margaret Asher, who had been about to take her seat in the front row, froze. Her champagne flute slipped from her fingers and shattered on the stone paver. The sound was like a gunshot in the silence. Orion stopped 2 rows from the front. She looked directly at Margaret, then at Liam. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Sorry we're late," Orion said, her voice smooth and projecting clearly to the stunned audience. "It took a while to get the boys ready. You know how it is. They take after their father." She gestured to the empty seats on the groom's side, the side reserved for family. "Come on, boys," she said to the triplets. "Go say hello to Grandma." The silence that followed Orion's command was absolute. Even the birds in the meticulously manicured hedges seemed to stop singing. The only sound was the gravel crunching beneath the small patent leather shoes of Noah, Oliver, and Henry as they took a few tentative steps toward the woman who had just dropped her champagne glass. Margaret Asher stood frozen, her mouth slightly agape, her eyes darting between the three boys and her son at the altar. Her brain was trying to process the impossible, trying to find a lie that could cover the glaring biological truth standing in front of 300 of New York's elite. Noah, the boldest of the three, tilted his head. He looked at Margaret with the innocent curiosity of a 3-year-old. "Are you Grandma?" he asked. "Mommy says you're scary." A ripple of nervous laughter cut through the crowd. Someone in the back row actually choked on their drink. Margaret's face turned a violent shade of crimson. "Get them out of here," she shrieked, her voice cracking. She pointed a trembling finger at security. "Security! Remove this woman and her hired actors immediately. This is a prank, a sick, twisted prank." 2 large security guards stepped forward, looking uncertain. They looked at Orion, who stood like a statue of retribution in her blood-red gown, and then at the boys, who were unmistakably Asher clones. "I wouldn't do that if I were you." A deep, resonant voice boomed from the limousine. Harrison Blackwood stepped out. He adjusted his cufflinks, stepping into the sunlight with the easy confidence of a man who owned the room before he even entered it. He was wearing a tuxedo that fit so perfectly it looked like a second skin. He walked to Orion's side and placed a possessive protective hand on the small of her back. The crowd gasped again. Harrison Blackwood was not just a lawyer. He was a celebrity in the business world. He was the shark you hired when you wanted to dismantle a Fortune 500 company before lunch. Seeing him with Orion Danvers changed the equation instantly. "Mr. Blackwood," Margaret stammered, her aggression faltering for a split second. What are you doing with her?" "Escorting my client and partner," Harrison said smoothly, his voice carrying to the back rows. "And ensuring that her children, the lawful heirs to the Asher Trust, I might add, are treated with the respect they deserve." Heirs. The word hung in the air like smoke. At the altar, Liam Asher finally moved. He stumbled down the 3 marble steps, ignoring the priest, ignoring his best man, who tried to grab his arm. He walked toward the boys as if in a trance. He stopped 2 feet away from Henry. Ideally, he should have looked at Orion, but he couldn't take his eyes off the boy. Henry had Liam's nose. He had the same cowlick in his hair that Liam had fought with his entire life. "Orion," Liam whispered, his voice hoarse. Are they "They're yours, Liam," Orion said, her voice cold and devoid of the love she had once held for him. 3 years old next month. You'd know that if your mother hadn't thrown a pregnant woman out into a thunderstorm. I didn't know," Liam stammered, tears welling in his eyes. He reached out a hand to touch Oliver's shoulder, but the boy shrank back, hiding behind Orion's red skirt. "You didn't ask," Orion countered, sharp as a knife. "You let her write the check and you looked the other way. You chose the money, Liam. Now you have to live with the interest." Suddenly, the heavy doors of the church entrance slammed open again. Jessica van der Hoven. The bride stood there. She had clearly been listening from the vestibule. Her massive tulle dress took up the entire doorway. Her face was a mask of fury. "What is going on here?" Jessica screamed, marching down the aisle, her veil trailing behind her like a storm cloud. She stopped beside Margaret, glaring at the children. "Who are these brats, and why is she here?" "They're his children, Jessica," a guest whispered, loud enough to be heard. Jessica whipped her head around to look at Liam. "Children? You have 3 children. You told me your ex was a barren gold digger." "That's what Mother told me," Liam shouted back, looking helpless. "She said Orion was lying about being pregnant." All eyes turned to Margaret. The matriarch of the Asher family straightened her spine, trying to regain control of the narrative. "She was lying," Margaret hissed, stepping over the broken glass of her champagne flute. These mongrels could be anyone's. She probably adopted them to run a con. Look at her. She's a waitress. She can't afford to raise 3 children, let alone dress herself in whatever that is. Margaret gestured disdainfully at Orion's gown. Orion smiled. It was the smile of a predator who had just watched the prey step into the trap. "A waitress," Orion repeated softly. She reached into her clutch and pulled out a small, folded piece of paper. "Harrison, would you?" Harrison took the paper and unfolded it. It was a document. "For the record," Harrison announced, his lawyer voice projecting clearly, "Ms. Danvers is the founder and majority shareholder of Aura Technologies. As of the acquisition closed last Tuesday by Horizon Corp., her personal net worth is estimated at approximately $1.2 billion. The silence this time was different. It wasn't shock. It was awe. The guests, many of them business people, knew Aura. They knew the acquisition. It had been all over the Wall Street Journal. "Billion," someone whispered. "She's richer than the Ashers," another voice muttered. Orion took a step forward, closing the distance between herself and Margaret. "I didn't come for your money, Margaret," Orion said, her voice low and dangerous. "I have plenty of my own. I came to return the invitation. You wanted me to see Liam's happiness. Well, here I am. And I brought the only thing Liam ever really created." She looked down at the triplets. "But don't worry, we won't stay for the cake. I hear it's dry." The wedding ceremony never happened. The priest, sensing the divine intervention of pure chaos, had quietly slipped out the side exit. Jessica van der Hoven had stormed off in her massive dress, screaming into her cell phone to her father, the oil tycoon, demanding he sue someone, anyone. But the reception was paid for. And in the world of the elite, you never waste the catering. An hour later, the guests had migrated to the massive air-conditioned tent set up on the lawn. But the atmosphere was less celebration and more crime scene investigation. Groups of socialites huddled together, whispering furiously, their eyes glued to the corner table where Orion Danvers sat. She hadn't left. Margaret had tried to have her removed, but Harrison Blackwood had calmly informed the head of security that removing a guest who held a valid invitation and who happened to own the company that provided the security firm's cyber infrastructure would be a career-ending move. So they stayed. Orion sat with Harrison and the boys. The triplets were happily devouring plates of lobster, mac and cheese, oblivious to the fact that they were the center of a high society hurricane. Liam sat at the head table alone. His bride was gone. His mother was currently in the kitchen, reportedly screaming at the caterers to vent her rage. Liam kept staring at the boys. He held a glass of scotch that he had refilled 3 times in 40 minutes. Finally, he stood up. He walked unsteadily across the dance floor toward Orion's table. The room went quiet. The string quartet stopped playing. "Orion," Liam said, stopping at the edge of the table. He looked broken. The arrogance that had defined him 3 years ago was gone, replaced by the hollow look of a man who realizes he threw away a diamond to pick up a rock. Harrison shifted in his seat, ready to intervene, but Orion held up a hand. She wiped a smudge of cheese off Henry's cheek and looked up at her ex-husband. "Hello, Liam." They really are amazing," Liam whispered, looking at the boys. Do they know who I am?" "No," Orion said simply. "To them, you're just a man in a suit. We don't talk about you." The words hit him like a physical blow. He flinched. "Orion, I'm so sorry. I know that sounds useless now, but God, if I had known. If I had known you were pregnant, I never would have let Mother." "Stop!" Orion cut him off. Her eyes were hard. "Don't blame your mother for your spine, Liam. You were 25 years old. You could have stood up for me. You could have called. You could have looked for me. But you didn't. You enjoyed your bachelor life, your trust fund, and your engagement to the oil princess. You only care now because I walked in here wearing $1 billion and your genetic legacy." "That's not true," Liam protested, though his voice lacked conviction. "I missed you, every day." "You missed the way I made you feel adored," Orion corrected. "You didn't miss me." At that moment, Margaret Asher stormed into the tent. She had recomposed herself. She had touched up her makeup, fixed her hair, and donned her armor of denial. She marched straight to the table, flanked by 2 lawyers of her own family retainers, who looked significantly less impressive than Harrison Blackwood. "This farce ends now," Margaret announced, her voice dripping with venom. "I don't care about your little tech company, and I don't care about these props. You are trespassing on a private family moment." She turned to the crowd, raising her voice. "Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for this interruption. This woman is a fraud. We have no proof those children are Liam's. For all we know, she used a sperm donor who looked like him just to entrap us. It's a shakedown." The crowd murmured. It was a desperate lie, but Margaret sold it with conviction. Orion stood up slowly. She was tall in her heels, towering over Margaret. "A shakedown?" Orion laughed. "Margaret, check the stock market. I could buy this entire estate and turn it into a parking lot for my employees without checking my bank balance." She stepped closer to Margaret. "But since you brought up proof..." Orion reached into Harrison's jacket pocket. He allowed it with a smirk and pulled out a second envelope. "I anticipated you might be in denial. Denial is, after all, your specialty." She tossed the envelope onto the table among the lobster tails and crystal glasses. "DNA results," Orion said, "from a lab accredited by the state of New York. I used the hair sample Liam left on his old hairbrush, the one I kept. It's a 99.99% match. Noah Oliver and Henry are his. She paused, letting the information sink in, then delivered the second blow. But that's not the most interesting part of the paperwork. Orion looked around the room, making eye contact with several of the Asher family's investors who were in attendance. Harrison, tell them about the trust. Harrison stood up, buttoning his jacket. Certainly. The Asher family trust established by Liam's grandfather has a very specific clause, Clause 4A. In the event of the birth of the first male heir of the direct bloodline, 40% of the principal trust fund shall immediately transfer to a trust in the child's name to be administered by the legal guardian until the child reaches majority. Margaret went pale, deadly pale. Since there are 3 male heirs, Harrison continued, enjoying every syllable, and Ms. Danvers is the sole legal guardian, that means 40% of the Asher fortune legally belongs to these boys, and by extension is under Ms. Danvers' control. You can't, Margaret whispered, clutching the tablecloth for support. That money, that's our money. It was, Orion said, picking up her glass of champagne and taking a sip. Now it's their college fund, and considering how you manage money, Margaret, I think I'll move it to a more secure portfolio first thing Monday morning. The room erupted. This wasn't just a ruined wedding anymore. This was a hostile takeover. Liam looked at his mother. Mother, is that true? The clause, Margaret didn't answer. She just stared at Orion with pure, unadulterated hatred. You ruined everything, Margaret hissed. You ruined his life. No, Orion said, leaning down to pick up Noah, who was starting to get sleepy. I saved his children from becoming like you, and now I'm taking what's mine. She turned to Liam. You wanted a wedding, Liam. You got a funeral. The funeral of your legacy. Orion turned to Harrison. I think we're done here. Let's get the boys some ice cream. Somewhere that doesn't smell like desperation. As they turned to leave, a voice called out from the entrance of the tent. Wait. It wasn't Liam, and it wasn't Jessica. It was Arthur Asher, Liam's father. A man who had been in a wheelchair for a decade following a stroke, a man Margaret had kept tucked away in the shadows, silenced and controlled. His nurse was pushing him forward. He looked frail, but his eyes were sharp. Wait, Arthur rasped again, raising a trembling hand. Let me see them. Orion stopped. She looked at the old man. He was the only Asher who had ever been kind to her, though he had been too weak to stop Margaret's tyranny. She hesitated, then walked over to him. She lowered Noah so the old man could see. Arthur reached out a shaking hand and touched Noah's cheek. Tears streamed down his weathered face. My boys, he wept. Margaret told me. She told me you lost the baby. She lied, Arthur, Orion said gently. Arthur looked up at his wife, his face twisting into a grimace of rage that transcended his physical weakness. You, Arthur pointed a finger at Margaret. You told me. My grandson was dead. Margaret took a step back. Arthur, I did it for the family. She was nobody. She is the mother of my heirs. Arthur roared, a sudden surge of strength shocking everyone. Get out! Get out of my sight. The drama had just escalated from financial ruin to family war. And the camera's guests were definitely filming, now caught every second of it. The Monday morning following the Red Wedding, as the tabloids were already calling it, broke over New York City with a grey, relentless drizzle. But inside the glass-walled conference room of Asher Enterprises on the 40th floor, the atmosphere was even stormier. Orion sat at the head of the table. Technically, it wasn't her seat. It belonged to the CEO, a position currently held by Margaret Asher. But when you walk in with the majority voting power of the family trust and a lawyer like Harrison Blackwood, you sit wherever you want. Margaret sat on the opposite end, looking like a woman who hadn't slept in 48 hours. Her eyes were rimmed with red, her skin sallow beneath layers of heavy foundation. Liam sat next to her, slouched, staring at his hands. He looked less like a corporate executive and more like a truant schoolboy waiting for the principal. "Let's make this simple." Harrison began sliding a thick stack of documents across the polished mahogany table. As per Mr. Arthur Asher's instructions delivered via his power of attorney this morning and the invocation of Clause 4A, the transfer of assets has already begun. "You can't do this," Margaret spat, her voice raspy. "You can't just walk in here and strip mine this company. We have shareholders. We have a board. We have the majority," Orion corrected calmly. She didn't shout. She didn't need to. The trust holds 51% of Asher Enterprises, and as the guardian of the primary beneficiaries, Noah Oliver and Henry I control 40% of that. Arthur controls the rest. And guess who Arthur is listening to right now? She pointed to the large screen on the wall. Arthur Asher was live via video link from his home office, a nurse standing by his side. He looked frail, but his expression was stony. "Arthur," Margaret pleaded, looking at the screen. "Tell them to stop. She's trying to destroy our legacy. She is saving it." Arthur's voice crackled through the speakers, magnified and undeniable. "I saw the quarterly reports, Margaret. I saw what you've been doing, funneling money into shell companies, paying off your gambling debts in Macau. You thought because I was in a chair, I was brain dead." Liam's head snapped up. "Gambling debts? Mother, you said the liquidity issues were because of the market." "Shut up, Liam," Margaret shrieked, slamming her hand on the table. "The audit is already underway," Harrison interjected smoothly. "But that's a matter for the SEC. Right now, we are discussing the restructuring. Effective immediately, Margaret. You are removed as CEO. Liam, you are removed as VP of Operations." "What?" Liam stood up, knocking his chair back. "You can't fire me. I'm a Asher. You're a liability," Orion said, finally looking at him. "I looked at your division's numbers, Liam. You've lost $12 million in 2 years on innovation projects that never launched. You're not a businessman, you're a drain." "But how will I live?" Liam stammered. The reality of his situation was crashing down. No trust fund access, no salary, no wife. "You have a degree," Orion shrugged. "I hear Starbucks is hiring. They offer great health benefits." It was a cold, calculated callback to the job Orion had held when they first met, the job Liam's friends had mocked her for. Margaret wasn't done. She stood up, her hands trembling with rage. "You think you've won? You think you can just waltz in here with your bastard children and take my empire?" "Careful," Harrison warned, his voice dropping an octave. "Slander is expensive." "I don't care," Margaret screamed. "I built this. Me, Arthur, was weak. Liam is useless. I did everything. And I won't let some gold digger take it from me." She lunged for the documents on the table, trying to tear them up, a desperate, animalistic act of futility. Security. New security hired by Orion that morning stepped in immediately. 2 large men in dark suits, gently but firmly took Margaret by the arms. "Get your hands off me!" she screeched, kicking and thrashing as they dragged her toward the door. "I am Margaret Asher. This is my building, Liam. Do something." Liam just stood there, paralyzed, watching his mother be hauled away like a common trespasser. When the doors closed, the silence in the room was deafening. Orion looked at Liam. "You should go too, Liam. Security will escort you to your office to collect your personal effects. You have 1 hour." "Orion," Liam whispered, his eyes pleading. "Please, I'm the father of your children. Doesn't that mean anything?" "It means," Orion said, standing up and smoothing her skirt, "that I expect you to be a better man eventually, for their sake. But until you grow up and stop hiding behind your mother's checkbook, you stay away from my boys." As Liam was led out, defeated and broken, Orion slumped back into the chair, letting out a long breath. Her hands were shaking slightly. "You okay?" Harrison asked, placing a hand on her shoulder. "I hate this," Orion admitted quietly. "I hate that it had to be this way. I didn't want a war, Harrison. I just wanted them to leave me alone." "They started it," Harrison reminded her. "You just finished it." But the war wasn't over. Margaret Asher was down, but a cornered animal is the most dangerous kind, and she was about to prove that there was no depth she wouldn't sink to. 3 days later, the victory champagne had turned sour. Orion was at her penthouse watching the boys play with a new train set in the living room when the doorbell rang. It was late past 9 p.m. She checked the security monitor. It wasn't food delivery. It was a man in a trench coat holding a tablet. A process server. Orion opened the door, a bad feeling settling in her stomach. "Orion Danvers?" the man asked. "Yes. You've been served." He handed her a thick manila envelope and walked away without another word. Orion tore it open right there in the hallway. As she scanned the legal jargon, her blood turned to ice. Emergency motion for full custody. Plaintiff Liam Asher. Co-plaintiff, intervener, Margaret Asher. The allegations were horrific. They claimed Orion was mentally unstable, that she had kidnapped the children and hidden them for 3 years, and most damningly that her current lifestyle as a high-powered CEO made her an absentee mother who relied on unvetted strangers to raise the heirs. But the worst part was the evidence. Attached to the motion were photos. Photos of Orion from 3 years ago working late nights at the diner, looking exhausted and disheveled. Photos of her leaving the boys at a daycare center in a rough neighborhood because it was all she could afford at the time. The caption read, "Child endangerment and neglect." Margaret was twisting Orion's poverty, the poverty Margaret had caused, into proof of unfitness. Orion's phone rang. It was Harrison. "Don't read the news," Harrison said immediately. "I just got served," Orion said, her voice trembling. "Harrison, they want the boys. They're suing for full custody." "I know," Harrison said, his voice tight. "And they've launched a media blitz. Margaret is on primetime live right now. Turn on the TV." Orion grabbed the remote. She didn't want to, but she had to see. There on the screen sat Margaret Asher. She was dressed in a modest pastel cardigan, wearing a pearl necklace, dabbing at dry eyes with a tissue. The interviewer, a sympathetic woman named Diane Sawyer Wannabe, leaned in close. "It breaks my heart," Margaret was saying to the camera. "We didn't know they existed. She hid them from us. She denied those poor boys their heritage, their family. And now she drags them to a wedding like props. It's abuse, plain and simple. We just want our grandsons home." We want to give them the stability they deserve." "And what about the rumors that she was fired from the company?" the interviewer asked. "A hostile takeover," Margaret sniffed. "She used the children as leverage to steal the family business. It just shows where her priorities are. Money, power, not the boys." Orion clicked the TV off, shaking with rage. It was a masterclass in gaslighting. Margaret had flipped the script. To the public, Orion wasn't the victim who overcame the odds. She was the vindictive ex who weaponized children for cash. "She's good," Orion whispered into the phone. "Harrison, can they win? Can they take them?" "In a fair court?" "No," Harrison said, "but the Ashers own half the judges in the family court circuit. Judge Cornelia Hawthorne has been assigned to the case. She's been on the Asher yacht every summer for the last 10 years. Panic clawed at Orion's throat. "So what do we do?" "We fight dirty," Harrison said. "But we need a witness, someone on the inside, someone who knows where Margaret's skeletons are buried." "There is no one," Orion said. "Arthur is bedridden. Liam is a puppet." "There is one person," Harrison said slowly. "Someone who hates Margaret just as much as you do right now." Orion's eyes widened. "You don't mean Jessica van der Hoven, the jilted bride, the oil heiress who had been humiliated in front of the entire eastern seaboard?" "She's probably halfway to Paris by now," Orion said. "Actually," Harrison said, "my private investigator says she's at the Plaza Hotel, drunk and destroying the minibar." "I'm going," Orion said, grabbing her keys. "Orion, wait." "No, Harrison. Margaret wants a war. I'm going to build an army." Orion found Jessica van der Hoven in the royal suite of the Plaza. The room was a disaster zone. Wedding gifts were smashed on the floor. A $10,000 dress was ripped to shreds on the bed. Jessica was sitting on the floor in a silk robe, eating caviar straight from the jar with a spoon. Her mascara was running down her face. When Orion walked in, after bribing the bellhop, Jessica looked up. She didn't scream. She just laughed, a dark, hollow sound. "Well," Jessica slurred, "if it isn't the woman of the hour. Come to gloat, or did you bring more secret children?" "I brought a proposition," Orion said, kicking a piece of broken crystal aside and sitting on the velvet sofa. "I don't need your money," Jessica spat. "My daddy has more oil than God." "I know," Orion said. "But you don't want money. You want revenge. You want to hurt Margaret Asher for making you look like a fool." Jessica stopped eating. She looked at Orion, her eyes narrowing. "She knew," Jessica whispered. "She knew you were pregnant 3 years ago. I heard her on the phone with her lawyer yesterday. She admitted it. She knew the whole time, and she let me walk down that aisle looking like an idiot." "She's trying to take my sons," Orion said, her voice breaking slightly. "She's painting me as a monster to get custody, just so she can control their trust fund again. If she wins, she gets the money back. And she gets to raise my boys to be just like Liam." Jessica was silent for a long moment. She looked at the ruined wedding dress on the bed. Then she looked at Orion. "I have emails," Jessica said suddenly. "What?" "Margaret and we planned the wedding for months. She sent me emails about you, about how she paid off the doctor to falsify your medical records 3 years ago to convince Liam you weren't pregnant, about how she bribed your landlord to evict you." Orion felt the blood rush in her ears. "You have proof of that. It's on my server. Jessica said, a cruel smile slowly forming on her lips. I kept everything, just in case. Why would you help me? Orion asked. I ruined your wedding. Sweetie. Jessica stood up, wiping the caviar from her mouth. You didn't ruin my wedding. You saved me from marrying a spineless coward. And frankly, I'd rather see Margaret Asher rot in jail than spend another second crying over her son. Jessica extended a hand, her diamond manicure catching the light. Let's burn the witch. Orion took her hand. The alliance was formed, and the custody hearing the next morning was going to be a bloodbath. The courtroom was packed. It wasn't just a custody hearing anymore. It was the season finale of New York's most scandalous reality show, played out in real time. Reporters lined the back benches, their pens scratching furiously on notepads. Judge Cornelia Hawthorne sat on the bench, looking down at Orion with disdain. The judge had lunched with Margaret Asher the week before Orion knew this, because Harrison had photos of them entering a private club together. But proving bias was hard. Surviving it was harder. Margaret's lawyer, a slick man named Preston Vane, spent the first 2 hours assassinating Orion's character. Your Honor, Vane droned, pacing in front of the judge. Ms. Danvers is a corporate shark. She works 80 hours a week. She leaves these innocent triplets with nannies. She has no family structure. And let us not forget, she concealed their existence for 3 years. This is not a mother. This is a kidnapper. Margaret sat at the plaintiff's table, dabbing her eyes with a lace handkerchief, looking every inch the grieving grandmother. Liam sat beside her, pale and silent. When it was Harrison's turn, he didn't pace. He stood still, radiating a terrifying calm. Your Honor, Harrison said, the plaintiff claims my client concealed the children. We argue that she was exiled, but words are cheap. Let's look at the timeline. Objection. Vane stood up. Relevance. Goes to the mother's intent. Your Honor, Harrison countered. Overruled. Judge Hawthorne sighed, clearly bored. Make it quick, Mr. Blackwood. I call my first and only witness, Harrison said, turning to the heavy oak doors at the back of the room. Ms. Jessica van der Hoven. The air left the room. Margaret's head snapped around so fast her pearl necklace audibly clicked. Liam's jaw dropped. Jessica walked in. She looked nothing like the hysterical woman in the hotel room. She was wearing a sharp navy power suit, her hair pulled back in a severe bun. She looked like an executioner. This witness was not on the list, Vane shouted, panic rising in his voice. Rebuttal witnesses do not need to be listed if they are impeaching the plaintiff's credibility. Harrison cited the statute from memory. Unless the court wishes to suppress the truth. Judge Hawthorne glared at Harrison, but waved her hand. Proceed. Jessica took the stand. She swore the oath. She looked directly at Margaret, her eyes cold. Ms. van der Hoven, Harrison began. You were engaged to Liam Asher until 4 days ago. Why did the engagement end? Because I found out his mother is a criminal, Jessica stated clearly into the microphone. Objection, Vane screamed. Hearsay slander. I have the documents, Your Honor, Jessica said, reaching into her briefcase. She pulled out a stack of printouts. These are emails between Margaret Asher and Dr. Aris Thorne, a prominent OB-GYN. Harrison took the stack and handed a copy to the judge. Read the highlighted section, please, Ms. van der Hoven. Jessica adjusted the microphone. Date November 14th, 3 years ago, from Margaret Asher. Subject the problem. Body Dr. Thorne. The girl is claiming she is pregnant. I need you to ensure the test results Liam sees say negative. I don't care what the blood work actually says. Fix it. The wire transfer of $50,000 is pending. The courtroom erupted. The reporters were on their feet. Order. Order. Judge Hawthorne banged her gavel, her face pale. She was looking at the email. It was authenticated. It was undeniable. She faked the medical records, Harrison said, his voice booming over the noise. She convinced her son that his wife was lying, effectively terminating the marriage and forcing a pregnant woman onto the streets. This wasn't concealment by Ms. Danvers. This was a conspiracy by Margaret Asher. That's a fake, Margaret shrieked, standing up. She forged it. Arrest her. I didn't forge it, Margaret, Jessica said calmly. You forwarded it to me last month when we were laughing about bullet dodging over wine. You bragged about it. Harrison wasn't done. Your Honor, we also have a sworn affidavit from the landlord of Ms. Danvers' apartment complex 3 years ago. He states that a woman matching Margaret Asher's description paid him $5,000 to evict Miss Danvers illegally in the middle of winter. Harrison walked over to the plaintiff's table and looked down at Liam. And you, Harrison said softly. You let it happen. You believed the lie because it was convenient. Because it was easier to be rich and single than to be a father and poor. Liam put his head in his hands and began to sob. Judge Hawthorne looked at the press gallery. She looked at the furious public scrutiny that was about to rain down on her courtroom. She knew she couldn't save Margaret Asher. Not this time. The motion for custody is denied with prejudice. The judge ruled, her voice tight. Furthermore, in light of the evidence presented regarding fraud and medical record tampering, I am referring this matter to the district attorney's office for immediate criminal investigation. No, Margaret screamed as the bailiffs moved toward her. I am a Asher. You can't touch me. I own this city. Not anymore, Orion said from her seat. She stood up, tall and victorious. Margaret was handcuffed in front of the press. As they led her out, she looked at Liam, expecting him to intervene. But Liam didn't move. He was looking at Orion. He mouthed 2 words. I'm sorry. Orion didn't respond. She just turned to Harrison and Jessica. Let's go home, she said. 1 year later. The headline on Forbes magazine featured a woman in a white power suit standing in front of a skyscraper with 3 little boys playing at her feet. The new Asher standard. How Orion Danvers rebuilt an empire and raised a family. Things had changed. Margaret Asher was currently serving a 5-year sentence in a minimum security federal facility for fraud, embezzlement, and bribery. She spent her days sorting mail and complaining to anyone who would listen that she was a victim of a conspiracy. No one listened. Arthur Asher had passed away peacefully in his sleep 6 months after the trial. In his will, he bypassed Liam entirely. He left his remaining shares of the company and the family estate in the Hamptons to my grandsons Noah Oliver and Henry, under the stewardship of their mother, the only Asher with a backbone. Liam Asher was not destitute, but he was humbled. Orion had given him a job, not as an executive, not as a VP. He was the assistant manager of the company's charitable foundation. He worked 9 to 5. He took the subway. And every other weekend, under strict supervision, he was allowed to take the boys to the zoo. He was learning slowly what it meant to be a father. He was learning that respect is earned, not inherited. Jessica van der Hoeven had surprised everyone. She didn't go back to the oil fields. She invested her settlement money into a startup, a digital security firm specializing in detecting corporate fraud. She and Orion met for lunch once a month. They weren't best friends, but they were allies. War buddies. And Orion. It was a Sunday afternoon at the Hamptons estate, now renovated to remove all the gold leaf and pretension. The garden was filled with laughter. Noah, Oliver, and Henry were chasing a golden retriever through the sprinklers. Orion sat on the veranda sipping iced tea. Harrison Blackwood sat next to her, his hand resting comfortably over hers. They weren't rushing anything. They didn't need to. They had time, and they had peace. "You know," Harrison said, watching the boys. "The board wants you to run for Senate next year." Orion laughed, leaning her head on his shoulder. "Let's survive potty training first, counselor. Then we'll take over the world." She looked out at her sons, happy, safe, and loved. She had walked through fire, faced down billionaires, and rewritten her destiny. She wasn't the broke waitress anymore. She was the matriarch, and God help anyone who tried to mess with her family again. And that is the story of how one woman turned her humiliation into a billion-dollar victory. It's a reminder that no matter how hard people try to push you down the truth, and a really good lawyer will always win in the end. What do you think? Did Margaret get off too easy with 5 years? Should Orion have forgiven Liam, or was making him work for her, the ultimate revenge? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one. If you enjoyed this story of justice served cold, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And if you haven't already, smash that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you never miss a new story. We upload brand new drama every single day. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.